Great. So I think I've met everybody at this point, but I am Carrie Atzinger. I'm the genetic counseling faculty for the LEND program, and I'm also in charge of the observations across disciplines assignment. And I'm really going to be doing two things today. The first is to talk a little bit more about observations and how we think about those as a learning tool. And then secondly, talking a little bit about roles that we may take on as supervisors or clinical teachers, and just some things to think about in that area. So, can everyone see my slides? Yeah, thank you. I shouldn't have clicked away from seeing your faces before I asked a question, but I'm good now. Okay, so in terms of learning objectives for the first half, we're just going to talk a little bit more about observation as a learning tool, some factors that it can influence how we learn from observations, and sort of reflect on what you've learned up to this point from the observations you've already done, and how to optimize learning in your future observations. So I know that you all did 2 observations of other disciplines last semester, and we'll be doing 2 again this semester. Given the status of things, we're going to do it the same as last semester. So where you're observing the ITT patients, one patient being seen by your team, but by a different discipline than your own, and one observation of the patient on the other team, again, a different discipline than your own. And so I'm sure all of you at other times, either in other training that you've done or just for other requirements, have had other opportunities to do observations of your own discipline or of other in other situations. And really, when we think about observations as a learning tool, at worst, it can be busy work that sort of leads to resentment and shutdown in a learner and doesn't really have any value. Often it's passive, so a task that people do because they're asked to, but really the goal and at its best, observation can be a purposeful task that stimulates critical thinking. A lot of times this happens when individuals are observing something that they plan to do, because in that case, you know what you're looking for, right? You're trying to figure out what are the things I already know, what are the things I don't know that I'm trying to observe because I'm planning to do this in the future. When we're doing observations of other disciplines or observations of things that are not roles that we particularly will be taking on, then it changes things a little bit. So we're going to do an activity. This is where I need our breakout rooms. Oh, I found them. So what we're going to do is, this is a piece of art that I want you all to look at. And I'm going to break you up into groups. And I just want you to take a few minutes, and I'm going to give you 4 different prompts. I'll send them through the, once you're in the breakout rooms, I'll send them through the announcement so you can see them. In your groups, I want you to discuss them. So the first one, for example, is going to be just your initial impression of this piece of art. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What immediately jumped out to you? And then you're going to discuss that just very briefly. Then next, I'm going to ask you about what colors do you see? And there are going to be 4 different ones. And again, just discussing in your groups, what are your initial impressions? What things come to mind? And we'll just take 3 or 4 minutes to do this. So let me just put you in rooms real quick. Oh, where'd it go? There it is. All right. Like I said, we're just going to do we'll do 4 minutes. All right, and like I said, I'll send the announcement of the things that I'm asking you to look for. So it should appear once you're in the breakout rooms. Oh, and Nicoletta, because you're a host, it didn't automatically assign you to a room, so you can join any of the rooms.
There's one that has less. That's what I was just trying to check.
I think they all have. I think they all have 3.
Okay, I'll just join one.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Yeah, just wear a mask the whole time. Don't go by Silas. He's don't go by Silas. He's still negative. He said a little, but he was fine. Okay, welcome back, everybody. It occurred to me after I put you in breakout rooms that you couldn't see the art anymore after that, so you're relying on your memory, so that's hard. But a couple questions. In your groups, when you were talking about the first item, the initial impression, were people's impressions the same, different? Did you interpret that differently?
I know
I
in
think
my
our
group,
main reflection was that we don't understand what determines art.
it looks like a lot of people threw paint on. And so we were even just discussing like, well, how come if I threw paint on a board, wouldn't it be considered a fancy type of art too? So we kind of went on a tangent of just what creates art,
Yeah,
determines.
absolutely.
In our group, it seemed like people mostly had positive impressions of it, but kind of for different reasons. And people talked about different memories, like of art class or throwing balloons with paint, or more splatter paint. So kind of had different perceptions in that way, but overwhelmingly felt positive about it.
Different impressions based on experiences. Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like your group had a different impression than Christy's group as well. What about when you talked about color? I know, again, you were working from memory, so were people noticing the same colors, different?
In our group, I know one person first pointed out like the primary colors were really bright, and then my initial thought was like the middle has like a lot of dark colors in it. So I think we focused on different things.
Yeah.
We talked about it too, and one of my group members said that they noticed red and orange first because that's what their eye gravitates towards, or maybe like that's their favorite color. Whereas I said mine was towards this white in the middle. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I think for me, my eyes gravitated more so to blue and green because I was trying to make sense of it. Like, oh, that could be water and that could be land. And then we got into the other colors and I was like, oh, wait, this is chaotic. I don't know what I'm looking at.
When you talked about techniques, how did that go in your discussions?
We pretty much agreed just abstract, but we also talked about going back into grade school and putting marbles in a box and rolling paint around, or just throwing paint at a canvas with a balloon or something like that. Just having fun with it.
Was technique harder based on how much experience you have or don't have with art? Harder, what I mean by than picking out color or picking out your own personal impressions and opinions?
I would just say that like verbiage was harder. Like I didn't know, like when I thought about this, I thought about like splattering paint and like, is there like real verbiage for that? And then Donna came up with like, it's abstract, and like that, the word didn't like really occur to me in terms of art, just because I have less exposure to that. So it took more like muscle memory than just kind of evoking feeling and naming things.
Yeah, great point. And then what about emotions, how you reacted to it? Again, were people finding there was variety among how people reacted to it? Did you not have any reaction? That's okay too.
Oh, okay. Our group, all three of us, we were like, it ain't coming in our house. And if somehow it ended up in our house, it wouldn't stay there long. File 13. So we identified it as abstract art that, I mean,
not for you.
Who knows? No, it's gone. It's gone. When he was staying in my house.
So
now, Pat, now that I look at it and you say that, I see a bunch of angry birds in there just throwing stuff at you. There's an angry bird right in the middle with his little thing. There's an angry bird up on the top with a big spiky hair going on, the sunglasses. He's coming after you. He's throwing paint at you.
Well, that's
right now.
Yeah, that's why it's not in my house. And I have a motto, and my motto is, if you don't help pay for the mortgage, you don't stay in here. So those angry birds could come, they wouldn't last long.
So one of the reasons that I like to do this exercise is because it points out a lot of things really quickly. And that is, one, you can observe something, and depending on what you're asked to look for, what you see when you look at the art is very different. If you're asked to look for color versus you're asked to look for how it makes you feel, then those are going to result in different observations. Also, that different people can observe the same thing and be asked to look for the same things and come up with different impressions that are both correct. It's influenced by lots of different things. And that's true of art, but it's true of lots of different things. You can have your own impressions based on your goals for the observation, what your prior knowledge is, your own background, what your previous experiences are with what you're observing, and what sort of directions that you're given. And so usually the best observations as a learning tool is when you're given direction of what is it that I'm supposed to be looking for, and what lens am I using when I'm observing. So the purpose of the clinical observations, in this case, again, there could be lots of purposes and there are lots of things that you could take away from them, but the goals from a LEN perspective are really to focus on 2 of the MCH competencies. So the first is the interdisciplinary team building. So this is just the text of that competency. But in this case, what we're asking is for you to be thinking about interdisciplinary teaming in 2 ways. So one, when you're observing the patient being seen by a different member of your own team, you are also hearing the conversations that are going on among the team members, and you're able to observe or think about what you saw in that observation as you watched, and also what the conversation sounded like around it and how those things are communicated and things like that. And also think about, you know, in going forward when you see other patients, or if you're not in a clinical specialty, when you're, you know, talking to families or other people about their maybe anticipating their experiences, seeing these different specialties, you know, what are your takeaways? How might you collaborate with them? What are things that you can pass along? Things like that. And then the other competency, is family professional partnerships. So in this case, this second piece is more asking you to think about the experience, or the interaction that you're observing from the family's perspective, and what might they be, how much, you know, as you observe them, how are they reacting to what's going on? How is the professional that you're observing responding to the family and their questions and their concerns, things like that. So those are the 2 goals for this observation assignment. And that's the same as last semester with these observations. So you can think about things like your expectations going in. Do you have prior experience with this discipline in any way, or this clinic, or is this new to you? What's your perspective on how it impacts the patient or the family? Reflecting on your own role and how you might interact with these this other discipline in the future, and how you observe interactions among team members related to this discipline and how that might impact the family. And that was really all I wanted to talk about with that today. Are there any questions or questions about the assignment itself? I haven't finished reading everybody's observations from last semester, but I will, and I'll put comments on them as well as for things to think about going forward. I do ask that people, unless it's not possible, observe different disciplines than you observed last semester, so that you can have a wider range of things that you're looking at. And so for the rest of the time today, I wanted to talk about a different but related topic. So related to the learning experience for professionals. A lot of the research that I do in genetic counseling is related to supervision. So how do professionals learn to become teachers in a clinical setting? What's effective supervision? What's the experience of supervision like for the trainee? Things like that. And so that's what I'm going to draw on, and the rest of what I'm going to talk about. Again, my research is genetic counseling specific, but there's actually not a ton of literature in the genetic counseling field. So we draw on literature from other fields, medical education, counseling psychology, and social work, a number of others as well. So hopefully this is broadly applicable for people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about models of supervision and why I think learning about models is helpful. Discuss some methods and approaches for providing feedback, which may be in a supervision setting, but also are just helpful tips for providing feedback to people in any setting, and also sort of approaches to dealing with some challenging situations that can come up. Obviously, in 35 minutes, this is going to be a quick overview, but I just wanted to introduce some of these things. I always like to start with this graph. So this comes from a research paper that is in the genetic counseling field, looking at people who act as supervisors and how confident and competent they feel in their teaching ability in the clinical setting. And so along the side here, the PSDS, that's the psychotherapy supervisor development scale. It's really just a way of measuring how do people feel, how confident do they feel in their abilities as a supervisor, and how competent do they feel. And then you can see along the bottom, it's years of experience. And as people gain more experience, they do feel more confident in their skills as a supervisor. But what you could notice, that's the dotted line, that first one. But what you notice is this solid line. This is individuals who've had some sort of formal training and supervision. And what you see is that they also increase in their confidence and competence as they have more experience, but they do so more quickly. And I really do think one of the reasons for that is that if you have some sort of context for what you're doing, rather than just trying to figure it out on your own, it can help you feel more comfortable with what you're doing. So to take a step back, what is supervision? Oops. So supervision is when a professional is helping a trainee learn the development of a new skill in that field. It does always involve a relationship between the student and the supervisor. And there's a lot of literature in a lot of fields that shows that building a strong, trusting relationship between the student and supervisor is important for learning. And then there is an aspect of professional socialization. And what I mean by that is that values, perspectives, approaches that are common in that profession are often passed along through supervision. A lot of you have probably had experiences where you've been supervised. And we don't have a ton of time for this, but I'm just wondering if people, don't tell me any names or anything like that, but any experiences that you've had that didn't go well, where you felt like it wasn't the best learning environment for you? And what made it that?
I think for me, worst supervision experience occurs when there's a miscommunication between me and the supervisor. So what my expectations going in differs from what their expectations are, but also feeling that power dynamic and maybe not being able to voice your concerns because you are being trained and under their supervision. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, both that there can be communication issues and also a mismatch of expectations is at the root of a lot of difficulty in supervision. And I think also one thing you bring up is the power differential is really important. And then one of the reasons that it is really the responsibility of the supervisor to set the communication expectations, clearly communicate their expectations and things like that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. So let's switch it.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, when it feels like you're wasting their time, or it feels like they're not attentive or focused on what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that some of that comes back to that student or trainee supervisor relationship. If you don't feel like the person you're learning from is invested in your learning, it's really hard to take feedback seriously. It's hard to feel like you're gaining anything from that experience. Let's switch it up a little bit. Tell me instead about best supervision experiences. What made something a good learning experience?
I always like for my supervision, like when my supervisor has like a plan and kind of having like a schedule to go off of or an outline that kind of sets you up for success because you know like what to prepare for.
Yeah, so you know exactly what's coming. There isn't that element of the unknown.
I think the best clinical instructors that I've had as a physical therapist when I was a student, clinical instructor is just the name for our teachers. per se in our field were the ones that like really seemed like they wanted to teach and were really passionate, because it just made me feel more comfortable around them and be able to be willing to be open and feel like I can ask questions.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. And you bring up a good point. Supervisor is the term we use in gen ed counseling, and some fields use that, but preceptor, clinical instructor, attending, there's lots of different names that are used in different fields.
I had a CI ask me how I preferred my feedback, whether it was like in the moment or after a session. And I really respected that because she cared about me as a person and how I learned best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Being able to be flexible in that way and creating an opportunity for the learner to give you feedback. Okay, so I'm going to skip these two just to make sure we have time for other things. But I do want to point out that as a supervisor, you really do have multiple responsibilities. So first of all, to the student, it is your responsibility in that role to make it a good learning environment. You also have a responsibility to the training program that the student is in, or depending on the situation, an employer, to provide feedback about whether that trainee is progressing in the way that they should. And then at the same time, as a supervisor, you ultimately are the one responsible for patient care. So you're in multiple roles at the same time and trying to balance those. I mentioned models of supervision, and I'm going to go through two of these fairly quickly. So the three that I talk about most often are discrimination models, developmental models, and then one called the reciprocal engagement model of supervision, which is gen ed counseling specific, and I'm not going to talk about today. So discrimination models are just the idea that in different situations as a supervisor, you're going to be taking on different roles. So in some cases, you may be teaching information. So saying, hey, this is how you should do this, or when this comes up, this is what you should do. Sometimes you're going to be consulting, and that may look more like, hey, I noticed this happened in the session. What do you think was going on there? How do you think you might handle that differently next time? So sort of doing it more collaboratively. As a supervisor, that you take on a counseling role. So this doesn't mean providing counseling to the student, but it does mean asking them about their feelings and emotions and how they're reacting. So, hey, I noticed when the patient got upset that it seemed really difficult for you. What is that bringing up for you? How are you thinking about handling that in the future? And then evaluation. Evaluation is really assessing where a trainee is at in relation to expectations. And then there are these other categories, so that you may be taking on any of these roles as a supervisor, specifically around skills, around the big picture, how you conceptualize a case, around self-awareness and professional behaviors. One of the things that is helpful about a model like this is that it helps us think of other ways as supervisors to do things. So it's not uncommon for supervisors to have a role that they're most comfortable with, whether it's teaching, like it's easiest for me to just explain how to do something, but that with more advanced trainees, it might be better to be more collaborative and draw on their experiences. In research that a colleague and I have done, we found that supervisors are reluctant to take on that counseling role to ask how the experiences are impacting students, and it may be that role is less frequently needed, but it's important because it can impact learning, and we all have emotional reactions to things that are important to keep in mind. Developmental models, there are a number of different developmental models that exist, but the idea of a developmental model is just that supervisees at different stages of training have different characteristics and may need different types of supervision or feedback. And so this comes back to that idea of somebody who's done, many different clinical rotations or had many different learning experiences is going to perhaps need a different kind of supervision than someone who's doing something for the very first time. And I think we, again, intuitively know that as people who've had to learn to do things ourselves. that you need more intervention and more support when you're earlier in the learning process. But I do think it helps to understand that there's sort of, that's a specific model of how we think about providing supervision. And that it doesn't, developmental level doesn't have to mean just experience, like how many patients have you seen? It could be, you know, how motivated is the learner to learn? How anxious are they about learning a new skill? What are their, how clear are the goals that you have for supervision, or how clear are the goals that the student has? So those are all things that can affect how we, what roles we take on as a supervisor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about strategies for effective supervision. First of all, just sort of big picture strategies, but then going more specifically into some ways to provide feedback. So first of all, establishing clear goals, making sure everybody's on the same page about expectations, saying what those expectations are out loud, rather than have them be implied, because often miscommunication about expectations comes from those being implied. Oops. Being very clear on what the evaluation process is and what people are being evaluated on. Maintaining professional boundaries is extremely important. When there's a power dynamic difference and there's the evaluative piece, it's important that those professional boundaries exist. It's also important to keep in mind, and this comes up to varying degrees in different fields, is when you have multiple roles as a supervisor. So maybe you're an instructor and also a clinical preceptor, or maybe you're working with a student on research and also involved with them in clinic, and just making sure that you're aware of how those multiple roles may influence your feedback. Creative supportive atmosphere. So one where it's recognized that everyone, whether trainee or professional, makes mistakes, and that that's okay. We learn from those things, and where asking for feedback is encouraged. A technique that can be really helpful in supervision is using self-disclosing or self-involving statements. So that's things like, hey, when I was first training, it was this particular skill was hard for me to learn, or I would, you know, this is something that I needed to work extra hard on. You know, how has that been for you? What is hard for you? What is easy for you? So just self-disclosure of things from your own learning process can be really helpful. And making sure feedback is constructive. So that's what we're going to talk about next, is approaches to feedback. Before I get to that specifically, just another note about expectations. Make sure expectations are behavioral, something a student should do or not do, as opposed to things like be professional. Well, if we aren't explicit about what that means, then there can be lots of miscommunication, or just making sure that they're very specific. Stated explicitly, that can be referred back to if challenges or conflicts arise. Okay, feedback. Feedback is one of my favorite topics to talk about because it's one of the biggest parts of learning during supervision. Big picture tips for feedback. Giving feedback privately whenever possible. I'm sure that, again, in learning experiences, especially if it's feedback of things to work on, it can be really helpful whenever possible to get that feedback privately. Sometimes you're in the middle of clinic and your supervisor needs to give you feedback in a more immediate sense, so it's not always possible, but whenever possible. Providing balance, so we're going to talk about different ways to balance both strengths, things people are doing well, and weaknesses, areas to work on. Think before you speak, especially if you have an emotional reaction. So this is just, again, remembering that even as teachers or instructors or supervisors, we're all still human and can have emotional reactions to things, and making sure you're thinking about what is the learning that you want to come out of a particular situation, and how do you address that. Recognize how the feedback impacts a student and be willing to talk about that. Be timely and avoid surprises. So making sure that if you're working with a trainee or a student over time, that you're providing feedback along the way and not just, yeah, everything's fine. And then at the end, you're providing feedback that you didn't throughout. And that can be difficult for a trainee. Oops. And the last, there was another one. It was, I forget.
End with an action plan, something to do.
Yes, thank you. Having a takeaway step. So what are you going to try next time? Or what is a specific way to improve can be really helpful. So in terms of specific approaches, the first one I want to talk about is the feedback sandwich. Does anybody know what this is? Or can you guess based on what it's called? Anybody? I see a lot of head nods.
It's like the Oreo effect, something positive, then give some of the constructive feedback and then end again with positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so overall, everything went really well, but I do need you to work on XYZ, but generally, good job. So the idea of this is, first of all, it's very common, both in learning and just in general. And some things to think about with this technique. One of the positives is that it really does balance constructive feedback and positive feedback. And that's one of the reasons that it's comfortable to use as a supervisor, because it's a way of softening the criticism or the growth feedback or whatever it is. Some of the difficulty, though, is that, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but if you have a supervisor that uses this a lot, it can lead you to sort of skip the positive. When they're giving you that feedback in your head, you're thinking, yes, but what is the but? What is the thing that didn't go well? That especially can happen if like the example that I gave, if the positive feedback is very general, like overall, that was great, but here's XYZ specific things that you need to work on, but overall it was great. Because you're getting very general positive feedback, but very specific critical feedback. So if you're going to use this, it's much better to be more specific. So you can say, hey, in that session, I noticed the family, had this concern and you really addressed that really well for them and were focused on what they needed. Some things that I think we should work on are XYZ. So again, being very specific with positive and specific with the negative makes this work a little bit better. A sort of modification of the feedback sandwich is a technique called ask, tell, ask, teach. And this, I want to credit Chris Peltier, who's a pediatrician who does a lot of teaching about medical education and is who I learned this from. And the idea here is still to balance the positive and more critical feedback, but to do so in a way that is a little bit more collaborative and a little bit more separate. So the first thing you do in this method is ask the learner what they thought went well and give them a chance to tell you, overall, what do you think went well? So it allows them to self-assess, and then you can add to that or say, yes, I agree, that was something that went really well. I also noticed this went well, or you did this well, again, keeping it specific. Step 2 is for, to tell. So agree or add things. Step 3 is to ask learner what they thought went poorly, or what are things they think they could do better next time, or didn't go the way they wanted to. Again, this separates a little bit more the discussion of the positive from the discussion of the things to improve. And then the teach piece is, really jumping in with the teaching of, okay, yes, I think that could go better. Here's some ideas that I have about how you could do that differently. Or if you're wanting to take on more of that collaborator role, what are some ideas of things that you think you could do next? So again, creating that action plan for next steps. In general, with feedback, it's helpful to keep it fast. So focused on what can be changed. So not personality, focused on behavior. Being just like with observation, deciding what is it that you want to assess. You can't assess everything at once. So as a supervisor, what do you want to assess? Providing specific details and then making sure that that feedback is timely. And then the last method I wanted to mention is something called the 5-step feedback method. This one is very different, but I think it's helpful in thinking about what's a different way to separate positive and negative feedback. So in this method, you really separate the positive and the constructive feedback in time. So that means you may use one case that you're seeing with a student or one learning experience to say, hey, I'm just going to provide you for this case feedback about what I think you're doing well. And for the cases we see tomorrow, we're just going to focus on things to improve. That seems a little strange. It's usually not as comfortable for people initially as a supervisor, but it does avoid that problem of people skipping past the positive or skipping past the constructive feedback to only focus on one or the other because you're giving them separately in time. So then one of the biggest parts of this that I really like is that you're providing your observation focused on the patient or whoever the learner is, client or whoever they're working with. So instead of saying, hey, I noticed that you didn't address XYZ or whatever, you're focusing on the client or patient and saying, hey, I noticed that when you explained this piece of information, the patient got upset and didn't really engage after that in the session, but we didn't really talk about it. Did you notice that? What do you think was going on there? So it's again, focused on collaborating on caring for that client or patient. And then waiting for a response or acknowledgement from the trainee. And if the student seems defensive, like, oh no, I didn't notice that, you can go back to expectations. You can talk about, well, what did you see going on? What were your observations? So again, keeping it focused on observations. And then asking the student to collaborate on a solution. So, okay, well, because we saw this happen or because this didn't go the way that we hoped it would, or it went fine, but maybe it could be better. What do you think are some things that we could try next time? So really focusing that collaborative piece on the next steps, the solution. And then agree on that plan or next step. All of these involve some amount of self-evaluation or reflection, which is really important in supervision. It's important for developing self-reflective practice. But you do have to be careful that it doesn't feel like fishing. And what I mean by this is, and again, I imagine all of you have had this experience, your supervisor says, tell me how you think that went, or tell me what you would do differently next time. And your immediate reaction is, I want to say the thing that they are expecting me to say. And it feels a little bit like a quiz, and I don't know exactly how to answer that. And so it's really common to use this technique. It can promote student autonomy and self-assessment, but it can sometimes make students feel defensive or like it's a quiz. And some of that is personality. And so you may just have to talk with students about how to do that. And I think some of the methods we already talked about can help overcome that. So focusing on, hey, let's first talk about what went well. And I can also provide you some feedback there before we start talking about, things that may have not gone as well, for example. And then with the last few minutes, I just wanted to mention a few challenging situations that can come up. I mentioned multiple roles already. So if you have, as is common in a lot of training situations, if you have multiple roles with a student, that can complicate the feedback that you're providing, and you want to make sure that you're still assessing based on what you're seeing in that clinical or that learning situation. Sometimes there are just personality differences. When you work with people, you are always going to have this happen, and that's okay. It's just figuring out how to make sure that your feedback is not based on personality or not based on just getting along or not getting along, but it's instead based on things that can be observed and that are constructive for learning. Related to that, but a little bit different, is style differences. So in every field, there are skills, but there are also different approaches to how you use those skills, or different things that you may, different ways that you may do things. And so figuring out what is just a different way of doing things than you're used to versus what is incorrect or should be done differently is something that takes some practice as a supervisor to figure out. Somebody has their hand up.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mhm.
Those strategies are great when it's a non-urgent or emergent, potentially dangerous situation that may be occurring, or that the supervisor and the student may be in the midst of. So which of those strategies work best when okay, for example, I supervised a lot of student nurses. And so when you're about to hang the wrong drug on or about to do some other technique that is potentially dangerous for the person, and this could be utilized also in the testing setting as well. Yeah. Which of those techniques is best?
Yeah, so I think in that case, there's sort of two steps. One is first the immediate intervention. And so that maybe is a supervisor stepping in and taking over. So, you know, in the situation you're describing, you know, stepping in and saying, hey, nope, that's not the right thing to drug to give. This is the right one. Or, you know, in a situation where it's information being given, certainly stepping in and saying, oh, nope, that's not exactly right. Like this is the correcting things in the moment. And as a supervisor, knowing when to take over. And some of that also means figuring out as a supervisor, when do you take over and just keep control of that situation? And when is it okay to take over and then say, okay, I've corrected that mistake. Now, why don't you try again? And that's going to vary a little bit based on what's the skill being learned, what's the level of risk, all of those things. But then there's a second step. And I think that second step of feedback is where after the immediate situation has been addressed, saying, okay, you noticed that I stepped in here. And I did that because I thought that there was a risk to the patient there. And so let's talk about that. What happened? You know, what do you think led to that situation? You know, what could we do differently to make sure you're prepared the next time? So I know some of this stuff I'm talking vaguely because I'm trying to make sure it's more applicable to everyone as opposed to being very specific, but you're definitely right. There are situations where waiting to give feedback after the fact isn't safe or isn't okay. And in that case, you definitely want to step in and really take control of that situation as a supervisor. And then that second step is, okay, let's debrief about that. Let's talk about why I had to do that and what we can do next time to lower that risk, prevent that mistake, improve whatever skill needs to be improved. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I've had to do it, intervene before. I mean, you have to intervene quickly when somebody's about to do something that's harmful. But I just thought that I would bring it up because that's the reality, is that there are some things that someone's about to do. You know, even in this testing process or discussing, having discussions with families that's leading them in the wrong directions. And so it's always the weighing, is it an embarrassment to the student and then what's my duty and responsibility? Yes. So that's the two sides of the scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the patient has to come first. The patient's safety and experience and all of those things have to come first. And so creating a learning environment where mistakes aren't punished doesn't mean you don't point them out or correct them in the moment, even if it does cause some brief embarrassment for a student. Obviously, you don't want that to happen, but safety is the more important thing. And then it's figuring out, okay, you know, what learning needs to happen in order to prevent that moving forward. And so you make a really good point. And that's somewhat related to the next challenging situation that I mentioned, and that is if you have a trainee who has what's described here as problematic performance or repeated errors that you've talked about before that you're trying to work through. And in that case, again, it's figuring out what's the disconnect, what is the specific thing that needs to be addressed. And that may sometimes mean working with a trainees program to figure out what other learning experiences they may need. Sometimes it's creating a remediation plan. But it's definitely more challenging as a supervisor, because supervising is fun and easy when students are doing a great job at everything. But it can be especially rewarding when you work with a student who does have a specific challenge and can help them work through that and be successful. Because we all have our things we're stronger at and weaker at, and everybody has their areas of challenge. And so when you're on the supervision side, it's remembering that and helping people work through that. The other thing I always like to mention with supervision is just time. As a professional, you're being pulled in lots of different directions, and so taking on student training adds time, and to do so effectively adds time that sometimes you have and sometimes you don't have. So it's just something to keep in mind. And there can be also a level of anxiety as a supervisor, especially when you're first doing it. It is a whole different skill set than the professional skills that you're learning. And so it's okay to recognize that that's something you will learn and gain experience with, and hopefully find some training to help you with. Some references, and I just wanted to see if there are other questions that people have, or things related experiences, or things related to supervision you wanted to talk about. Let me just stop sharing if I can. Oops. There we go. Jason, I like your comment about the open-faced sandwich. I think you're right. I think there's another way of describing some of the other techniques, is that you're trying to balance that positive and negative feedback, but also do so in a way where the trainee is hearing both. Well, thank you all. It's nice to see you, and hope you had a good New Year and winter break.
Thank you so much, Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think we'll just give it a minute, and then our friends from ITT will be joining us. I was just looking around to see if anyone's here yet, but I don't think they are. So Marta and Lindsay and Sally will join us. And before anyone goes anywhere, I think the only people that need to stick on are the people who are on the leadership teams, but just don't go anywhere just yet, just till we can make sure. But I'm almost positive that's what their plan was.
Leadership teams as last time, or
they're different. So you would have gotten an email from Marta to your CCHMC account letting you know. I'll let Marta tell you.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, I got to check that then.
Yep, make sure you're checking your CCHMC accounts. And that's probably good for everybody to hear anyway. Check your CCHMC accounts, because we'll post things to Canvas and the announcements if there is any COVID changes, but if there's something immediate, you may see it faster from your supervisor through the email related to COVID right now. Yeah, because it's so everywhere. Go ahead, Marta.
So I also piggyback on that. With ITT, I put most things in email because I have, like when I'm communicating with you guys, I'm including the patient information, which I can't put in Canvas. So I think the question is who our leadership teams are. So I'm going to read off names. Abby, Pat, Julie, Nicoletta, Andrea, Christy Gregg gets to come back, but in a different capacity. Shannon and Amber. So if I didn't say you, you get to leave. You can always stay if you want to just hear what we're talking about. Or you can have the gift of time and exit.
Gift of time. Yay. See the rest of you on Thursday. Stay safe.
Oh, there's Sally. Okay. Okay. So I sent an email. It was probably just yesterday. It's been a really long day. I feel like today's Friday, but it's not, it's Tuesday. So I think the email was just sent yesterday with our 2 patients and the leadership team roles.
Wait,
Jason, I don't have you, so you can
okay.
leave, or you can stay and listen. Totally up to
Okay, I
you,
was trying
but you're
to
free to
find-
leave.
Okay, because I didn't know and I was trying to look at my email. Sorry, and I got
You're
distracted.
fine.
Thank you. Sorry.
You're fine. See ya. So Lindsay and I found a couple kiddos for this go round. So your email, if you check your CCHMC email, it will have the kiddo's name, date of birth, and MRNs. Again, they're both boys. And even like think about
Marta,
that. Yes.
I don't know why, but I don't have the email.
Yeah, mine's acting up. Can you tell me what role?
Yes, we're gonna do that in a second. Okay, Abby and Andrea, do you have the email? Because you two really need the email.
Yeah, I got the email.
Cool. Because Andrea, you had it. Put your mouth.
I'm
It's
struggling
Andrea,
to
right?
log in. I'm struggling to log in into my children's account.
Okay. Let me know, because you two are the evaluation coordinators, so part of that means you're presenting the kid. So you definitely need to know those medical record numbers so you can give them a chart to know who we're talking about. Andrea, I apologize. So I'm in the middle of something else in my Epic, and I'm not sure what's going to happen if I just close it. But oh well, I'll deal with that later. Okay. The leadership team presentation is on Canvas today, under our first ITT meeting. It's not under today's session. You could go there and it won't be there. It's under our first meeting date, which I'll flip through 100 pages, which is next Tuesday, the 18th. So under Tuesday the 18th, you will see the updated schedule as of yesterday and the leadership team PowerPoint and the evaluation forms, but we'll talk about that. Okay. So I will share my screen and I will pick the PowerPoint. Share. You all get real little when I do this. Okay. Abby and Shannon, you're who I can see. So if there's issues, can you please let me know? Okay. So this is the PowerPoint to go over the roles. Got it. It's telling me all kinds of tips and tricks. Okay. Okay, so some of you heard this last semester. You'll see that this is the same PowerPoint. So for leadership team, why do we have a leadership team in ITT? Our hope is that you all help us stay organized and that you learn some organizational tips and tricks as well. We're hoping that we increase engagement among the different team members and you guys learn some team skills, increase leadership opportunities. As you guys saw, I mean, training team last semester was pretty fantastic. So that was a combination of the leadership team, but like your cohort is just the level of engagement and conversation was something we don't normally see at that level that early. So I would anticipate you're the same people. It will continue. So it made it lovely for us all to sit back and watch you guys run with ideas and talk through all the different things. And so we want ITT to be training driven and always considering family perspective and thinking about things from the social determinants of health. So there are 4 roles, hence 4 of you per team. The evaluation coordinator, which is Abby and Andrea. Family advocate this semester, that is Pat for team 1. Christy, you changed roles, that is you for team 2. The meeting leader, which is Julie for team 1. Pretty sure that's Shannon for team 2. Yes. And our note taker, Nicoletta, team 1, Amber, team 2. So those are the roles, and later it says again who you are. The ITT schedule has who the leadership team roles are and who you are at the bottom of the schedule always also. So the evaluation coordinator, you are the person who introduces the team, the rest of the team to the kid. So that's the presentation on the 18th. There are no rules to that presentation on the 18th. It's whatever you want to do, whatever you're comfortable with. I will tell you, Pam and I were just emailing a little bit back and forth. These kids don't really have that much involvement at Children's. There's not that much in the charts. So there's not that much to share because we don't really know much. But whatever you can find in the chart, let us know. If you want to do a PowerPoint, you are welcome to do a PowerPoint. It's not mandatory. It's not required. It's whatever helps you with your thoughts and how you would present a case. You two are also, we did change this up a little bit. Abby, you are for sure the lead for the ISS visit, but we also block psychology so that psychology could be with you. Andrea, that's our goal for team 2 also, is that it'll be a psychology MD ISS visit, but it's scheduled under Lindsay's schedule. Team 1 is scheduled under Pam's schedule in our epic blocking of providers. So, and you guys might recall how your counterparts did things, psychology did these at the first semester at that case conference meeting. The evaluation coordinator does a lot of the talking, synthesizing. We've gathered all this information. What do we do with this information? What do I need to help me prepare for an ISS? How do you already prepare for an ISS? What are you looking at? So that we can all learn from that experience as well. And then lead the ISS session visit. Does that make sense?
Can I ask one thing, which I think is really obvious, but when we present the case, we're allowed to use like patient identifiers, right? Like the name.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Don't not like if you do a PowerPoint, do initials.
Okay.
In the actual PowerPoint, like your kid is Jonathan.
Yeah, JK. So,
JK.
but
you
I
can
can say his name.
Call him Jonathan when we talk about him.
Okay.
Andrea, team 2's kid name is Cooper. I don't know how to say his last name. So Cooper. And CB or Cooper in the, if you're putting anything on Canvas. But again, not required, totally whatever helps you guys prepare. Pam did message me that she's not going to be, she's on PTO next Tuesday. So you can touch base with her prior, obviously. But if you need anything next Tuesday, you are welcome always to touch base with Sally, Lindsay, or I. We can do whatever to help too. Any other questions about the eval coordinator? Family, so Christy and Pat this round. Especially Pat, you did this last semester kind of outside and it wasn't your leadership requirement role, but helping us remember why the family is here. What is the family asking for? What was the family's goal? We want to make sure, you know, as you saw, you get in our evals and we go down our pigeonhole pathways. We need to make sure we're still thinking about why they came and what the family is seeking and make sure we're trying to answer all of the questions they have that we can. And then we might ask you, it depends on what the needs are, but we may ask you for help with like obtaining some information about community resources. Sound good? Do you guys have any questions? I cannot see Pat's face. Sorry.
No, I don't have any questions.
Cool. Thank
Questions. Thanks, Marta.
Meeting leader. So Julie and Shannon, your job is to move us along. So we do want you to post minutes. There are example minutes, which were lovely from your fall meeting leaders on Canvas. So you can take those and just modify them as you see, as the schedule fits. We do ask for minutes to go up on Canvas like Sunday. for the meeting on Tuesday, kind of that time frame. So we have it all to see on Monday if we need to. We would love for you to help keep people on time. Last semester, we had more actual meetings scheduled into the schedule than we get for spring semester. Spring semester just moves super quick and there's a lot to get in. So there are days where we have one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 disciplines presenting in one session. So they are actually going to have to keep to time limits. So we're going to need your help with signals. If that's a clock, we have to kind of work through what's the best way to notify someone. You've got 5 minutes left. You've got 2 minutes left. At our first meeting next week with everyone, we will say, we have less meeting. You're going to notice there's less actual ITT meeting sessions this semester. It's going to be really important for people to stay on time. Help redirect us if we are going on tangents. And then if we bring up things that are to be addressed later. So if we're having a conversation and we're like, it would be really great if the OT evaluation would help us answer this question. At the bottom of the minutes, there's a section, parking lot. If you could just jot those in there. And then when OT talks, have a reminder for yourself of like, oh yeah, we asked for this information from OT. Do you have an update from us? Something like that. Does that make sense? You are herding cats. Okay. Here's an example of minutes. Folks for the past couple of years have been basically breaking up the time frame by how many presentations there are, and you get that many minutes. There are some disciplines like social work. We often say, I don't need 30 minutes. If someone needs more, give me 15. Genetics, genetic counselors often say things like that too, especially if they know, like they've seen the kid and they know, like, we're not too worried about a genetic component here. I can make my presentation shorter if needed. So on those days where we have like 8 people, we might be looking at that a little bit.
Marta?
Yeah.
A quick question. So whereas last semester we observed, I think it was 2 from our own team and 1 from the other, or whichever that was. So, but as a part of the leadership team, do we need to be watching on the days that are scheduled, those actual meetings as they're occurring?
The evaluations or the ITT 3 to 5 sessions?
I'm sorry, the evaluations.
No, that
Okay.
that'll look the same to my knowledge for you as it did last semester. If there's any like discipline, like sometimes I make Shannon watch certain things live, and sometimes I say you can watch that, record it, depending on like our clinic workflow too. So if there's anything different about that this semester, your supervisor should tell you. But because of leadership, we have no requirements that you must watch all of the ITT evaluations, and definitely you don't have to watch them live.
Okay.
Yeah. Hold on. I've been a little popular today. There's someone knocking on my door. Real quick. Okay, I'm back. So our note taker, Nicoletta and Amber, then, correct? Your job's to take notes. So last spring, and then in fall was the first time we trialed this of not taking notes like a minutes taker would in a meeting, but creating the case conference worksheet to be where we kept our notes and our minutes, and that made this a running dialogue. I felt like, and I think Sally and Lindsay also felt like, that really did help move along the case conference meeting. We didn't spend so much of the meeting going over all of the evaluations again, and we're able to spend a lot more of the meeting really talking about diagnosis, recommendations, services, supports, the next pieces. So I think it would be great if you tried this with us again, and then we'll probably make our final decision after the semester if this is going to be the format we always go to. You are not expected to write down all of the information because the presenter is putting their PowerPoint on Canvas for people to refer back to. So this helps us also kind of guide if the first presentation for team 2 is probably going to be medical and audiology and genetic counseling. I think there might be more people, but like those 3, you can kind of go to those sections. What are the, for genetic counseling, what are the genetic findings? Did medical might also have a genetic question that they would put in there for that. Medical is going to go over vision, eyes, nutrition, growth. And so you can just kind of jot those things in here so that when we come back to the case conference meeting, most of these sections are filled in. Does that make sense? And then they posted them last semester, they were posting them to each ITT meeting. So if we had an ITT meeting, let's say there's a meeting on February 1st, you do your case conference notes and then you post them to February 1st ITT in Canvas. And we
So
would
Marta,
love, yeah.
Can I pop in a second? Last semester, one of the note takers felt like there were just a lot of nuances to this form, like knowing what could go where. You guys probably remember last semester that there are 3 or 4 different disciplines that talk about behavior. And so we sort of created like a cheat sheet of what could go where. And I just want to get a sense from Amber and Nicoletta if that would be helpful to you. It's not prescriptive. There's no one right way to do this. We just want to make sure we capture stuff. But I thought we had, and I wasn't sure if that was something, Marta, that the Angel sent or Jen, I don't remember. Okay, I'll reach out to them because we did it in one of the breakout rooms and thought, gosh, this would be a great thing to share going forward with all like cohorts. So Amber, that would be helpful to you?
Yeah, I think so. I'd appreciate that.
Sally,
Yeah.
I think Angel has that because I think she was the one typing it on the screen when we were on that breakout.
I agree. So let
Yeah.
me ask her to send it to me and I'll I think we can just post it to Canvas for you guys to have, but I can email it, Amber and Nicoletta, to you all. And then Marta, I know you were looking for, I think you've posted everything on that you're reviewing actually on next week's.
Yes.
on
Everything
Canvas.
is on January 18th.
Yeah.
Like today's meeting didn't have a spot in Canvas. So, and it's fine. As I also, as you might recall, as the schedule changes, I was just updating the first ITT meeting, but also I was doing a Canvas announcement and sometimes sending an email. We're already talking to all of your clinical supervisors because I am a little stressed with scheduling and really worried that we're going to have trainees who are out, faculty who are out, and like families who are sick. Or it snows, it always snows during winter and it always leads to a cancellation of somebody's vow. So I'm already talking to your clinical supervisor, everyone's clinical supervisors about how are we going to handle that, because this year feels extremely uncertain and schedules feel really, really tight. So we're working on that in the background as well. So there, I will make, if schedules change, I will make those announcements on Canvas so that you see them. I don't know. Canvas sends me emails too whenever somebody makes an announcement. I don't know how I set that up. It just happens. So, okay. There's more about this one. Maybe. Advance. Advance. Maybe. No. There we go. So you guys have been through a case conference already, but really the idea of the case conference is what goes into synthesizing all of the information, these evaluations, these different visits, into creating a concise report that makes sense and has information that can be shared with the family about diagnosis, next steps, and how are we going to help you achieve your next steps. So like I said before, we're hoping that case conference again this semester looks like a joint venture between medical and psychology. And though they're scheduled not necessarily exactly like that. So the case conference meeting hopefully goes very similar to our case conference meetings last semester that were very productive, and we got through them. We got the diagnosis information, and Lindsay helps a whole lot with making sure that you have all the copies of all the evaluations to give to the family at that visit. And then we all come together to make sure that we have information about resources and services to give to the family at the visit. Any questions about case conference meeting? The one right before the ISS. Then we have the ISS. So at the case conference, we also decide, we already know who's going to lead it, but we decide who else will be there. Making sure we have enough people to explain the information, but not too many people that it feels overwhelming to the family too. So we'll talk about that at the case conference. This is a repeat of who you are in your role for both teams. And then do you have any questions, or do you have any questions or thoughts, feedback based on prior leadership roles? Or do you have any anxiety because you've never felt like you've been in a leadership role in a clinical area before? Okay. Any thoughts, needs, questions? You guys would be really fast. I told Shannon, I'm like, we always say 15 minutes and it always takes way longer. Sally, Lindsay, did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Nope, sounds good to me.
Okay. I want to stop sharing.
I emailed Angel, so I'll send that along when I get it. Amber and Nicoletta.
Okay. Well, Sally, Lindsay, and I are always here. If you've got questions, support during meetings, you can chat us. We're always here. So just let us know if you guys do need anything. If you guys need anything to prepare